On a Sunday evening in July 2013, in Hartford, Wisconsin, a 19-year-old woman named Jessie Blodgett, who dreamed of being a star in acting, singing, and music, gave an unforgettable performance in the musical Fiddler on the Roof. To those watching, it was evident that Jessie was in her element under the spotlight, and it seemed as though the spotlight was made just for her. After the final performance, the entire cast and crew decided to throw a pool party to celebrate their hard work and the positive reception of the musical. Jessie, who was well-liked and always lively, was initially having a great time at the party. However, as the evening went on, the inappropriate behavior of two male cast members began to upset her, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. Feeling troubled, Jessie later wrote in her journal about the negative experiences she had faced that day. She expressed her discomfort with how some men were misinterpreting her friendliness for romantic interest, saying it felt like a corruption of her character. Despite this, she ended her journal entry on a hopeful note, promising to face any issue head-on without fear, and prayed for God's guidance. Before going to sleep that night, Jessie spoke to her mother, Joy, about two men at the party who had acted inappropriately towards her. Both men were much older, in their 40s, and one had gone so far as to forcibly pull her onto his lap. Jessie couldn't understand why it was so hard for men to accept a purely platonic relationship. Her concerns, shared in that conversation, would soon take on a grave significance. The next morning, Joy checked on Jessie, her only child, before heading to work. Seeing Jessie sleeping peacefully, Joy left, assuming everything was fine. Jessie's father, Buck, had already left the house earlier, so Jessie was left to look after the house. Around noon, as per her daily routine, Joy came home for lunch. She noticed Jessie hadn't woken up yet, which was unusual, especially since one of Jessie's piano students was due for a lesson soon. Concerned, Joy went to Jessie's room to wake her up. Despite calling her name and opening the door, there was no response from Jessie. Thinking Jessie was just overly tired from the previous day's events, Joy tried to wake her by gently shaking her shoulder. The coldness of Jessie's skin was a shock to Joy, sending a chill through her body. When Joy pulled back the covers, she was confronted with the horrifying sight of Jessie's lifeless body, her skin a haunting shade of blue, and her hair and nightclothes drenched. Panic-stricken, Joy immediately called 911 and her husband, Buck, fearing the worst. As she waited for emergency services, she couldn't help but notice the marks on Jessie's neck, indicating she might have been strangled. The thought of such violence occurring in their home was almost too much to bear. Soon, their home was filled with first responders, working to secure the scene and uncover what had happened. Buck arrived and joined Joy in facing the unimaginable reality that their daughter had been murdered. The evidence suggested Jessie had been strangled, and marks on her wrists indicated she had been restrained at some point during the attack. This tragedy struck the Blodgett family out of nowhere, turning a day that had begun with the promise of normalcy into a nightmare. The community was left to grapple with the realization that such a heinous act could happen in their midst, forever changing the lives of those who knew and loved Jessie. The investigation into Jessie Blodgett's tragic death took a dramatic turn when law enforcement officials pieced together the sequence of events leading up to her murder. Early in the morning, after Jessie's mother, Joy, had left for work, a sinister figure took advantage of the unlocked doors, a common oversight in the Blodgett household due to their belief in the safety of their neighborhood. This intruder silently entered the house and made his way to Jessie's room, where he executed a heinous act of violence. Jessie, a young woman full of dreams and talents, was overpowered while alone. The attacker restrained her, binding her hands together, which was just the beginning of a brutal and unspeakable assault. The evidence suggested a terrifying ordeal, culminating in the use of a ligature by the perpetrator to strangle her, ending her life in a tragic and violent manner. The initial theory pursued by detectives was that the murderer must have been someone familiar with the Blodgett family's routines. This person would have known about their habit of not locking doors, a reflection of their trust in the safety of their community. Furthermore, the precise timing of the crime indicated that the assailant was aware Jessie would be home alone that particular morning, creating a window of opportunity to carry out the murder without interruption. Investigators delved into Jessie's personal writings, hoping to uncover any mention of fear or discomfort towards someone she knew, which could lead them to her killer. Their attention was drawn to a journal entry where Jessie described an uncomfortable encounter with an actor from her recent performance. This man became a person of interest, especially after it was discovered he had unexpectedly taken the day off work following the incident. However, after questioning, his alibi checked out, clearing him of any suspicion. The investigation broadened, scrutinizing another individual from the party who had made Jessie uncomfortable, but he too was quickly ruled out as a suspect. With these leads exhausted, the investigative team expanded their search, determined to find justice for Jessie. In a seemingly unrelated incident, Melissa Etzler experienced a terrifying encounter while walking her dog in a nearby park. She was attacked by a man wielding a knife, emerging from a van. In a desperate struggle for her life, Melissa managed to disarm her attacker. Despite her injuries and the shock of the moment, Melissa's quick thinking allowed her to retain the knife and provide a detailed description of the assailant and his vehicle to the authorities. This attack, though initially thought to be unconnected, provided crucial information that could potentially link to Jessie's case. Melissa's ordeal left her with significant injuries, necessitating medical attention and stitches. Yet, her bravery and presence of mind in such a perilous situation were commendable. She had faced down a violent attacker and survived, her actions potentially offering a lead in the grim puzzle of Jessie's murder. As investigators continued to piece together evidence and witness accounts, the community reeled from the shock of such violence in their midst. The search for the perpetrator of these crimes became a top priority, with law enforcement officials working tirelessly to connect the dots between these two frightening incidents and to ensure that justice was served for the victims and their families. When local law enforcement agencies were alerted about the description of the attacker and his van, a deputy who frequently patrolled the park mentioned he had seen the same van parked there weeks before. Although the van's presence wasn't illegal, the deputy had felt uneasy about the driver and had checked the vehicle's registration as a precaution. This meant the van owner's details were already on record, a potentially crucial lead for the investigators. The team working on Melissa's case initially hit a dead end when they discovered the van was owned by a middle-aged man who was clearly not the person Melissa had described. But the revelation that he had a teenage son reignited their hopes. Upon meeting with the van's registered owner, the detectives were met with cooperation. The owner mentioned his 20-year-old son, Dan, who matched the physical description provided by Melissa and often used the van. Although Dan wasn't home, his father readily supplied his cell phone number so the detectives could get in touch with him quickly. Intriguingly, Dan was at a vigil for Jessie Blodgett, indicating a close connection to the case. Dan, a former high school classmate and one-time romantic interest of Jessie's, had maintained a strong friendship with her, united by their shared passion for musical theater. His departure from Jessie's vigil to meet with detectives did not go unnoticed, but his willingness to cooperate without questioning the reasons seemed odd to the investigators. During the interview, Dan claimed he had been with Jessie all day on the morning Melissa was attacked, a claim that piqued the detectives' interest given Jessie's murder. Dan's immediate knowledge of Jessie's fate and the visible cuts on his hands raised further suspicions. His explanation for the injuries, a workplace accident followed by a cooking mishap, only deepened the detectives' skepticism, especially since his father had mentioned Dan was unemployed. The investigators were not convinced by Dan's explanations. The discrepancy between his story and his father's account, along with his quick but inconsistent explanations for his injuries, suggested that there was more to Dan's story than he was admitting. This line of questioning opened new avenues for the investigation, indicating that Dan might be more involved in both incidents than initially thought. The detectives were determined to unravel the truth behind these tragic events, guided by the evidence that was slowly piecing together a narrative of deception and violence. When Dan Bartelt was interrogated by the police, he initially seemed calm and collected. He explained his frequent visits to the park as retreats for his writing. According to Dan, he spent a lot of time there working on a novel, a project he claimed had occupied him for years. The tranquility of the park, away from the hustle and bustle of daily life, supposedly helped him focus on his writing. He admitted that instead of attending school or working, as his parents believed, he would often sit in his van, observing people and dedicating time to his supposed masterpiece. However, The tone of the interrogation changed dramatically when the detectives asked why he attacked Melissa. Dan's explanation was chillingly simple. He said he had done it because he wanted to scare someone. He described himself as a jobless college dropout without direction, overwhelmed by fear of the world, seeking to offload some of that fear onto someone else. With this confession, Dan was arrested for aggravated assault. At that time, detectives didn't connect him to Jesse Blodgett's murder, but that was about to change. During the early stages of investigating Jesse's death, the fact that Dan knew details only the killer would know, like the rape, immediately raised suspicions. This slip during the interrogation put Dan at the top of the suspect list for Jesse's murder, especially after the autopsy results confirmed the sexual assault. When confronted about Jesse's murder, Dan denied any involvement. However, a search of his belongings unveiled a disturbing collection on his computer. He had searched for content related to serial killers, snuff films, and other violent, pornographic materials. Among the videos were scenarios strikingly similar to the circumstances of Jesse's murder, further implicating him in the crime. Despite the evidence, Dan remained defiant. Yet, he altered his story, claiming that he and Jesse had recently resumed their romantic relationship, a detail he previously withheld to protect his girlfriend's feelings. Detectives verified Dan's whereabouts on the day of Jesse's murder through CCTV footage from Woodlawn Union Park, confirming part of his revised account. Their investigation led them to search the park's trash bins, where they discovered a cereal box containing a ball gag, ligatures, and blood-soaked wipes, along with ropes matching the marks on Jesse's neck. The search extended to Dan's home, where investigators found more rope and tape matching those under Jesse's bed and at Melissa's attack scene. Dan's fingerprints were found on the tape, solidifying the connection between him and both crimes. The accumulation of evidence against Dan painted a grim picture of his actions. His initial portrayal as a troubled writer was overshadowed by the reality of his violent behavior. The items retrieved from the park and his home linked him directly to the crimes, leaving little doubt of his involvement. The investigation, which began with a simple assault in a park, had uncovered a much darker narrative, intertwining Dan's fate with the tragic deaths and assaults he perpetrated. The investigation into Jesse Blodgett's murder brought to light a chilling narrative about her final moments. Detectives pieced together evidence suggesting that Dan Bartelt had entered Jesse's home in the morning, after her mother left for work. Stealthily making his way to Jesse's bedroom, Dan overpowered her, using a ball gag to silence her cries and ropes to bind her, ultimately leading to a brutal assault and her tragic death. Dan attempted to erase evidence by cleaning Jesse's body and hair before carefully placing her back in bed, covering her with a blanket as though she were merely sleeping. His efforts to cover his tracks continued with him discarding the murder tools in a park trash bin, a crucial mistake that contributed significantly to his capture. The case against Dan was compelling, with DNA evidence from Jesse's rape kit and under her fingernails matching his. The DNA on the ligatures used to strangle her further implicated him in this heinous crime. On July 31, 2013, Dan faced charges of first-degree intentional homicide for Jesse's death, along with attempted murder and other charges related to the assault on Melissa Etzler. After a jury deliberation that lasted 3 hours on October 14, 2014, Dan was found guilty of Jesse's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The prosecutor described him as one of the most dangerous criminals he had ever encountered. Despite proclaiming his innocence at the sentencing and receiving forgiveness from Jesse's father, Dan's plea did not sway the court's decision. Dan also faced charges for the attack on Melissa, ultimately receiving a relatively minor sentence for these crimes due to a guilty plea, knowing he would spend his life in prison for Jesse's murder. In 2017, Dan appealed his conviction to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, arguing that his confession was used against him unlawfully. However, the court upheld the verdict, ensuring he would spend his life in Waupun Correctional Facility. The true horror of Jesse's final moments might never be fully known, with Dan continuing to deny his guilt. The tragedy is a stark reminder of the betrayal Jesse experienced at the hands of someone she trusted, highlighting a life full of potential cruelly cut short. Jessie was more than just a victim. She was a vibrant young woman dedicated to the arts, beloved by her students and their families for her kindness and talent. Her loss was felt deeply by all who knew her, leaving a void in a community that had cherished her spirit and ambition. Jessie Blodgett was a bright and passionate young woman who used her voice and talents not only to entertain but also to advocate for the causes she deeply cared about. As a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin, Jessie was more than just a student. She was a vibrant advocate for animal rights, environmental protection, and a fervent opponent of bullying and domestic violence among young people. Her commitment to these issues was a testament to her character and her desire to make the world a better place. Tragically, Jessie's life was cut short before she could witness the impact of her advocacy and the potential social changes she hoped to inspire. However, her spirit and the essence of her dreams did not perish with her. In 2016, driven by a profound sense of loss and a desire to honor Jessie's memory, her father, Buck, established the Love, Hate Project. This initiative aimed to continue Jessie's fight against violence, specifically targeting male-on-female violence. Through educational programs and social initiatives, the project is dedicated to transforming aggressive behaviors into positive actions, promoting love over hate. The project embodies Jessie's vision, working tirelessly to create a safer, more compassionate world. Jessie's aspirations and the bright future she could have had will always remain a topic of contemplation. The betrayal by someone she considered a friend, who turned out to be the very antithesis of everything she stood for, adds a layer of tragedy to her story. Yet, the legacy of her compassion and activism lives on through the Love, Hate Project and the countless lives it touches. Jessie's life, though tragically brief, was a beacon of hope and love that continues to inspire change in the hearts of those she left behind. Her family and friends, though grieving, are committed to ensuring that Jessie's vision and dreams do not end with her death, but instead spark a movement that combats violence with love, understanding, and compassion. In this way, Jessie Blodgett's memory and the essence of her being continue to influence the world positively, driving efforts to make society a place where love triumphs over hate, and violence is replaced with peace and understanding. Her passion for music, her advocacy for the vulnerable, and her stand against violence create a lasting impact that transcends her untimely death. Through the Love, Hate Project and the dedication of those who knew and loved her, Jessie's dream of a kinder, more just world finds its continuation, ensuring that her voice, though silenced, continues to resonate and inspire.